Welcome to episode 12 of the Not Another Fitness podcast. You're with myself, Andrew John Scraggs, to give my formal name, which has been requested, by the way. And co-presenting with me today will be...
I'm doing my own introduction, so I can say the fabulous Amy Ramshead.
Like
no middle name, so yeah.
Not needed.
But I don't have one.
That's what I mean, not needed.
Not
who
needed.
needs a middle name?
Amy is just as fabulous. She does not need a middle name.
And who told us, Amy, that we needed to announce our names on this podcast?
So follow on from last week's episode with my wonderful mother's feedback. This was my mother's feedback. She's like, you need to say your full names. I know who you are, but there are people out there who are going to be listening that don't know who you are, and they need to be able to find you. So there we go.
Your mum she's doing God's work. She's doing us a service.
She is giving all the feedback. So thank you, Mama Ramshead.
I can't do Andrew John Scraggs for every single one, though. It'll be coming back to Andy. Maybe Andy Scraggs slightly.
Andy's fine. Andy's fine. Yeah.
The only time I get called Andrew is by my mum if I've done something bad, which, yeah.
Well, here's a story. So my mum called me Amy because she didn't want me to have a name that could be shortened. So she was like, I'll just call you Amy. Well, now she calls me Aim. So it's like Aim, or she calls me Rambo, which is very, very disconcerting.
Oh, Rambo's the one.
Yeah,
such a good nickname.
We were talking about this the other day, weren't we? And I was like, can you imagine if Rambo actually was my surname?
Was that because someone thought it was your surname? Though?
Yeah. Someone spelled your surname's Rambo, isn't it? I was like, no. That would be epic.
That's so good. That's so good.
I was like, if I got married, he would take my surname. There'd be no way I'd be getting rid of that.
Who wouldn't? I mean, that was the only thing. Like, I mean, Scraggs as a surname, that's just, I wanted to get rid of mine, but unfortunately not.
Has Sarah changed her name? I don't think she has she?
Sturgeon Scraggs.
Oh, double barrel.
So I've inherited a name, not got rid of one. Then we got two beauties together. But Scraggs is a tough one growing up. It just rhymes with bad things like shags and flags. For example, just a couple. Just throwing them out there.
I love that.
I'm not going to form that into a sentence. Anyway, let's carry on.
Yeah, so that's for Mummy, and that's for everyone out there who is probably a new listener. You now know our full names and where to find us. Stalk away.
Thank God. Right. Rambo, what you been up to? What you been doing over the last week or so?
What have I been up to? So I've had a haircut, if you can see. I've had a haircut. Went to see my mummy. She used to be a hairdresser.
I have not, as you can see. Let me just pull this out of the back there.
Yeah. Oh, your hair's almost as long as mine.
It's ridiculous.
Yes, had a haircut. Did a lovely webinar for F45 in Cambridge. I can't remember if I told you about that on the last pod. Did I? Yeah.
It's all a blur. It's all a blur, mate.
No, it's been lovely. I've had a very nice, relaxing weekend. Saw some friends, ate some good food. I kind of have no news at the moment. Things are a bit of Groundhog Day for us because obviously being a warehouse gym, we've been doing the outdoor exercise for a few weeks now. So we're kind of, I hear this phrase as well. Have you heard the new norm? Everyone's saying, oh, this is the new norm.
New normal. The new normal.
Yeah, well, that's been our kind of new norm at the moment is the outdoor exercise. But that's been really fun. So yeah, just getting stuck into the week. What about yourself?
There's been a few good ones, hasn't there? New normal is one, and unprecedented is another.
Oh,
I like those. I like those too.
Yeah.
What did I do last week? Now let me think. I met up with you, which you completely failed to reference.
I'm sorry. No, we did. We met up.
What have you been up to, mate? Yeah, nothing of any note.
We had a lovely lunch, and we got recognised in the park.
I mean, it just happens all over Stortford now, doesn't it? Can't go anywhere. Can't go to the park without getting accosted by a slightly tipsy young gentleman.
Yeah. Who was like, is this podcast Amy? I was like, oh, hi, yeah.
I love you, Josh. You're the man. Happy anniversary. Thanks, for a couple of weeks back, whenever this gets released.
We spent a lovely afternoon chatting to you and you gave us a couple of wonderful questions. So thank you. It was nice to meet you.
Yes, and we have banked them for the upcoming episodes. So they will be addressed fully.
Yeah.
What else have I been up to? Anything interesting? House is pretty much finished, which is good.
Does that mean I could come over for pizza?
Well, we were actually talking, weren't we, before we started filming about maybe in the next week or so getting together to record one of these. So watch. I'm not even going to say anything more. Just watch this space.
Watch this
Because
space.
hopefully we will do our best to make it happen.
Yep.
But yeah, not too much. Just obviously at the moment you can actually meet up with people now. So I had my first like meal out. It was a toasted sandwich and Eat 17. That was nice.
Where else would you go?
Starting small, starting kind of quite casual, and then building up maybe to a meal.
We've actually booked booked the pub for this Saturday to go for a roast dinner, so that's quite exciting too.
Honestly, it's the simple pleasures. It was weird going in there and just sitting down.
I bet it
I
was.
kept thinking I had to move. I was like, just sat there looking around over my shoulder, like, we're going to get asked to move on any second. But no, it was really nice. It's probably one of the things that I've been, probably number one was obviously seeing family and friends, but number two was definitely just going out and sitting down and eating, because it's something that we love to do. So,
Indeed.
Nice. Anyway, moving on from our fairly uneventful weeks. If you're still listening, well done.
We just like to bring you along for the ride, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. Just keep people in the loop.
Yeah.
This week, or episode 12, we're going to be talking about extreme exercise and dieting. So I suppose we made a note beforehand, like, how do you know you're going too far? How much is too much? Is there a sweet spot? Is it kind of like no pain, no gain? Should it be hard all the time? But yeah, how do you know? How do you know if you're training too much?
Are you asking me, or is that rhetorical?
It was rhetorical, but I saw you like just flexing then, so I thought, oh, maybe she's going to jump in, and there you go. Actually, I did. To be fair, I did just kind of dropped you in it there. I did say that I would intro this one.
You did.
So yeah. So apologies for that. I'll carry on. The reason why it's a subject that I wanted to talk about, and it has been brought up a couple of times, and we've touched on it on a couple of different episodes, is our demographic in the gym are obviously people that are on the keener end of the spectrum. So you might think that training too much or being too food focused, for most people, they could probably do with training a little bit more or paying a bit more attention to their diet, the general public. But we will run into people, and I've worked with people, and I continue to work with people who probably take it a little step too far. And without going into kind of minute detail, just broadly speaking, you're looking at things like training to the point of to injuring yourself. In terms of the diet, it might be, tracking every last morsel on MyFitnessPal. It might be going to bed thinking about macros and hitting certain calorie targets. It might be taking the calories criminally low to elicit some kind of weight loss. It might be missing a training session and feeling awful because you've missed one training session and you plan to do 7 that week. It kind of manifests in different ways for different people. And it's I think the reason why it's a good one to talk about today is that it's easier to spot in other people as a rule than it is to admit yourself. And I think, and me and Amy have both been there in this position where it's obviously easier to give the advice than it is to take it sometimes. And we're just going to highlight a couple of areas that we think, if this keeps happening to you, or if you feel this way, if your body reacts this way, you might be overtraining or you might be dieting too hard. Yeah. Amy, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, we've spoken before about things that we've experiences we've had ourselves, and I'm just nodding along while you're saying all of that, because it's that whole fine balance, isn't it, of what starts off as an introduction into a healthy behavior can very, very soon just tipple over into an unhealthy behavior. And it's even harder to spot in something when the behavior is healthy to start with. So obviously people start with trying to clean up their diet and start with, you know, an exercise program with the aim and the intention of making themselves a healthier person, with the aim of living a little bit longer and, you know, being able to do more, lift more, run faster. So it's a very, very fine line, and it's very hard to see when that does peter into those kind of unhealthy relationship with what is trying to make you better, or ultimately trying to make you a healthier individual. There's a word for it now, isn't there, as well, like orthorexia, isn't it, like being obsessed with being a healthy person, or being healthy. I mean, excuse me, I'm not sure if that term just refers to it, the diet side of things as opposed to the training side of things. But I think, I know for, I mean, I can only speak from my own personal experience. It once you've ingrained a habit, and if the habit you need to ingrain is going to the gym, it's the pleasure and the reward that you get from that, along with seeing results, which of course, when anybody starts training in any shape or form, they will see quite quick results because they have a training age of 0. So the adaptation that they get is quite big. And we're talking just about training and exercise. I'm talking about just about training and exercise at the moment. When you start to see results, it's that gratification, isn't it? It's that instant gratification. It's that, yes, this is good. I can do more than I did last week. So what might be hard for just a week to go to the gym, after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, you're like, oh, this is good. This is great. I'm loving this. Okay. If I'm loving it and I'm seeing results, I'll just do it more. I'll just do it more, because surely if I do it more, I'm going to see better results. And unfortunately, exercise and training is not one of those things that if you do it more, you necessarily see the better results. I don't know if you've ever seen, or I can't remember if I've talked to you about this before, or even on the podcast. It's kind of like that U-shaped curve, isn't it, of health, in terms of usually the fittest people are probably the most unhealthy, because the behaviors they have to engage in to stay that way. And I know, like, I would say any kind of behavior around training or exercise that you're feeling any kind of guilt from, or like, oh, I should have gone to the gym today, or, you know, starting to do squeeze in, let's say, like a morning session and an evening session, but then you're working 9 hours a day as well. Like, again, and I talk about this a lot, I always come back to this point, like, what is the why? Why are you doing this? Are you aiming to compete at the Olympics? Are you aiming to go in other kind of competition? Is this your full-time job? Are you getting paid to do this? You know, because that comes into it as well. It's just very hard to spot in something that initially is a healthy behavior and then tips over into something unhealthy. Yeah, I think that's be where I'd come from to start with. And we all know that person that we see in the gym every single time we turn up. And you might not even know them by name, but you'll be like, oh, like, khaki jogging bottom guys here again, or like
not him again,
not him again, or like, oh, girl with the hot pants on is in again. And like, we all have those people in the gym that we see all the time. I'd say the first indication in yourself that you might be overtraining is just that you're either A, under recovering, or B, you're just not actually making any progress anymore. And usually that's the key thing that makes people want to train more. They're like, oh, I'm not seeing progress anymore, so all I need to do is train more or train harder. No, actually what you need to do is take a step back and start recovering harder, and actually start training less in order to give your body time to make adaptations. They are the first 2 key things that I would look out for with regards to the training side, in terms of, yeah, don't be that person in the gym as well that everyone sees all the time. Maybe look at yourself and be like, am I the person? Am I khaki jogging bottom guy? Like, are they seeing me all the time? Because at one point I was.
I mean, there's so much there. Like, there's so many of those. I mean, like, if you're watching this, you'll probably see me nodding along as Amy was talking. I think the first when you speak, I try and like mentally like make notes
Please
of
just
like
interrupt me as well. Like I do
no,
go on.
when you hit your flow, the first thing you said, which I think is really important to pick out, is that all of these behaviors we're talking about. So let's say you take up running, you take up lifting weights, you take up doing some yoga, you take up doing some HIIT training, you start doing classes. None of these are bad. None of these are, it's not like I took up smoking. Man, probably shouldn't do that. Like, do you know what I mean? It's not like that. And that's what makes it, that's why it's not like a black and white recommendation and you should train 3 days a week or you shouldn't do 5 days a week. There isn't really like a should and shouldn't with this. It really is shades of grey, and you have to be. So moving on to your second point, which I thought was spot on, picking a couple of those things that if you're experiencing those early indicators of, maybe I am overtrained or maybe I am under recovered. And so that's kind of going down that route a little bit further. So let's take a repetitive injury or repetitive niggle that, you know, many of us I'm sure have had, and actually some of which you can almost expect to a certain extent, not breaking yourself, but just little niggles, little aches and pains. Like we all have them, you know, we have them anyway, let alone if we add training on top of that. But let's say you have, let's say it's a hamstring strain and it's like the third, fourth and fifth time that it's happened. At some point, so like when you have an injury, like normally, like what I do anyway is if I have something like that, I will look and think, right, could I have done anything to prevent this? Is this I was a bit tired and my technique was a bit shit and I was being lazy, which can happen. And actually that is something that you might need to spend time like with a trainer or with a coach or filming yourself doing like a certain lift. It might be a technical issue. You might just be, your technique might be poor and it's led to an injury. But that's a relatively easy fix. I mean, it might take a little bit of time, but identify it, work on it, improve it, done, tick. If your technique's flawless and you're doing everything by the book, I almost guarantee you're overtrained or under recovered. There's too much volume somewhere, or there's not enough recovery built in the sessions, or the frequency of those sessions is too high, or probably a combination of all three. And it can happen. Like I said, it can happen a couple of times even. But if you keep getting the same thing and every time you're like back to the physio, yep, same thing as before, right? Do your rehab exercises, lay off the sprints, do these stretches, and then you get back again, you train for another month, couple of months, and then it happens again. At some point, and I've done this by the way, so I'm talking to myself here as much as anyone else, at some point you have to take stock and think, I'm doing something wrong here. And if I'm not doing something technically wrong, you have to look at your programming. And is it a case of, you know, again, could be poor programming, could be, just didn't know how to arrange this stuff. But if you just feel like we talk about the feelings of guilt and feeling compelled to train all the time and you're not recovering in between, it's such a vicious circle. Like you said about the not getting results. Say you don't get injured, say you just stop making progress in the gym. Well, I should train harder then. Train harder, recover less, and then eventually you will get injured. And then again, then you're kind of taking 3 steps back.
Yeah, it's a big one, and I think when you, and like, I don't want this to come across as patronizing. Like we're only in our 30s, I'm early 30s. You're the other side. But you know, we're only in our 30s. And I think when you're younger, you're like saying in your 20s, and you do have a fairly young training age, you can definitely get away with it a bit more. You can get away with it a bit more. You can recover faster. You can survive on a little less sleep. Your nutrition doesn't necessarily have to be the most optimal because your body is in its prime. You maybe don't have the same life stresses as well. You might not have the same career stress. You might not have the same chronic level of stress in terms of bills that you've got to pay. You won't have gone through as much. Whereas when you're older, you can definitely feel overtraining a bit more. Every session maybe takes its toll a little bit more, and like you say, you become a bit more aware of your body and the aches and niggles. And like I was telling you this little story before we actually started recording, wasn't I, about back at Christmas we did this in-house competition here, And my dad was staying with us at the time, and we came home on the Saturday, and we always have the Christmas party, the gym Christmas party, the night of the competition. So we were just at home getting ready for the party, and he was like, oh, you two, how did you do in your competition? And both Jack and I were like, oh, we both came second. Like, Jack came second in the men and I came second in the females. And he was like, my dad was like, well, why didn't you come first? And we were like, oh, well, we were quite pleased with that, because the people that won were like 10 years younger than us. So we're quite chuffed. But like, it is that kind of assessing where you're at, because if that was your behavior when you were, 10 years ago, that you could train twice a day, 5 times a week, and you were really looking to achieve that goal of whatever the goal was, maybe that's just something that you can't do anymore because of age, because of because your training age is a little bit older, so your ability to actually adapt to the training you're doing is going to be less, and because your life has changed and your lifestyle has changed. So it's important to keep assessing, I think, as well, with regards to the training, what you're actually trying to achieve. And I say this a lot, I say it in even the sound bites as well, like, what is your why are you actually doing this? And if you're doing it for a goal, awesome. If you're doing it because you feel you should, or because that's why you've always done it, then that's not a reason.
And there's the training age thing. There's pros and cons to that. So when you're younger, say you're in your 20s, the pro is obviously you just recover quicker, and you recover quicker, so you can train more and you can train harder, and you probably haven't got a history of injuries, hopefully, anyway. So you haven't got like years of aching limbs or torn tendons or whatever else you kind of get as you get older. But the negative of when you're young is you don't know your body as well, because you haven't been training for as long. So that's not a bad thing. It's just, you learn, and this is a really key point of this whole thing. You should be learning as you go, because anyone can make mistakes, and actually, like, you will do. It's kind of comes with the territory, but you have to try and use it as a learning experience, because if you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, it starts off as being, oh, I just didn't know any better, but then it gets to a place where you do know better, but you just keep doing it anyway. So that's being foolish. And one thing that, as you get older, you might not physically be able to do as much as you once did, but you'll know your body a lot better, and you can pick up on those subtle cues of being under recovered. Maybe you've had a couple of rough nights sleep, and you just think, you look at the plan and you think, deadlift session plan today, it's my strength session, I'm meant to be going heavy. Actually, the world is not going to end if I either skip this session, or maybe I'll modify it and I'll just do some lighter work. Like, it's being intelligent with it. And I think that's one thing that working with anyone, that's why, like, the education part of it's so important, right? Like, telling people and asking people how they feel, and that little whether it's during the warm up, you have a little chat with the client, and how have you slept, or how did the last session go, what have you done this week, oh, you went for that bike ride at the weekend. You kind of glean a few bits of information, and if everything kind of, you have all these little kind of potentially red flags, or these little kind of checkpoints. If it's, I've slept shit, I did a mammoth bike ride at the weekend, the old hip injuries playing up, and you've got deadlifts written on the program, maybe change it. And it's, again, that sounds really, I suppose to me that sounds quite simple, but you'll be amazed at how many people ignore those physical cues, because for some reason, and it's kind of a badge of honor for some people, I think, their mentality is, it is that no pain, no gain, or I must not miss a session. And again, most people, you'd love to instill a bit of that in them, a bit of that determination and hard-headedness. But in these types of individuals, it often does more harm than good, because they keep pushing themselves to the point of the body breaking down. And that's not where you want to be.
And then it can have huge mental health benefits, because if your body's so broken that you actually physically can't train, or you've got an injury that actually stops you training for a significant amount of time, that can be really, really damaging as well. So again, it's about having that, I don't want to say maturity, but just having that awareness of your own body and your own limitations, and stepping back every so often and just reassessing. Like, okay, like, is this what I need right now? Have I slept shit? I mean, I had days where I used to commute 2 hours each way to Heathrow. So I'd spend 4 hours in the car. I'd drive straight home to the gym, and it would be intervals at periods of like 3-minute intervals with 30 seconds rest. So like, and you're going for like 40 minutes or something. So I'm like, oh, and we're multifunctional movements. And I'm like, oh, I know I probably shouldn't be here, but I'll go on then. Like, and and before you know it, you feel in even more of a worse place than you started.
Yeah.
And it's like, and once you're there, I mean, we've all probably had one session where we've turned up and then gone home after 10 minutes, but most people don't. They just push through because they're like, oh, I'm here now. So yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, the training's one thing, and I think we've just spoke about the training quite a bit and encompassed quite a lot there. And it's important as well with regards to training in terms of not to compare. So don't compare yourself to anybody else just because that person is in the gym 3 times a day. You don't know their goal, you don't know their situations. Like, leave the comparison aside, try and learn about your own body and do what's best for you, exactly what you just said. And I've written in the notes as well, like, fitness trackers, they can actually be a little bit of a guilt inducing thing as well, in terms of, oh, I've only done 3 workouts this week and my fitness tracker is telling me I need to do 5. Or, I've had this before with the steps thing. A lot of the time I take my fitness tracker off on a Sunday because I'm sorry, I don't want to do 10,000 steps a day. I want to sit on the sofa for 6 hours. Like, and it can be that very much feeling of everybody's doing more than me, everybody's achieving more than me, so I need to keep going, I need to do it all. And they can be a little bit more of a guilt inducing tool as well. So and it's hard to leave that behind.
Yeah, I think the training side of it, you can definitely look at, you can look at injury, or you can look at, just constantly getting niggles. When you start moving on to, the trackers, or even kind of, and I include Fitness Pal in that, tracking food as well, then you're moving into an area of, it might not necessarily be like a physical issue. It becomes more of a mental one. And like, obviously feelings of guilt are the absolute classic, right? Feeling guilty for not hitting steps, feeling guilty because your watch has said, you've got to hit your movement goal, you've got to, burn another 100 calories or whatever it is. Now, again, and I'm going to make the point again, but I just think because it's really important, if this is you, for most people, having a little nudge and saying, maybe you should move, maybe you should, get a few more steps in, has actually helped. For a lot of people, it's like, oh, wow, I never realized I didn't move as much. Brilliant. Great. This is not for those people. This is for the people that literally cannot get up in the morning without putting, like, if you get stressed by not having your tracker on, stop wearing your tracker.
Yeah.
And that might be easy. That goes for, you can overlay that onto, if you get stressed about not being able to get on the scales, get rid of the scales for a while, or at least try and modify if that's just if that freaks you out too much, at least like do like what you were saying, like have a Sunday off or have a couple of days off. The moment it starts, you should look at that tracker as just like little data points, no emotional attachment to it, or very, very little. Don't get me wrong, like it's nice, when you hit them streaks and stuff like that, but it shouldn't be like cause for celebration. Just like if you have a day where you only do 3,000 steps, it's like, oh, well, it's 3, it's no big deal. But the moment that starts kind of ruling your decision making, you've got a problem. Or not you've got a problem, but I would start thinking about how to alter the relationship with that bit of kit.
Yeah, massively. And like, I've talked before about my relationship with my Fitness Pal and how, like, I've weighed lettuce before, and I know that going out for dinner used to cause me a massive stress as well. Especially, I'd only enjoy going out for dinner if I knew that I could go somewhere where I could access the menu, they had it in my Fitness Pal, and I could pop the calories in, and then I'd build the rest of my day around that. And that is a very useful tool for some people who have a significant amount of weight to lose. And that is a very good way of navigating social situations. And I'm not dispelling that. However, I know for me, as a healthy, fit individual that didn't really have a particular goal, that wasn't a place that I should be in. So, you know, it's like you say, the tracker thing, it's when you're relying on the tracker to tell you how much you should again, wanky air quotes, eat, as opposed to your habitual, as opposed to the cues your body is giving you, your hunger cues your body is giving you, then maybe there's a little bit of a, oh, well, this is, I have to have another meal today because my fitness pal's telling me I need to. Well, no, unless you're probably a bodybuilder, you probably don't need to have another meal today if you're not hungry. Or, you know, it's being a bit more in tune with your body. And, you know, when you couple the two together, training and the obsessive about diet and exercise, which again, I'm very, very generally speaking here, when someone gets obsessive about training, again, and this, they generally get obsessive about maybe being in a calorie deficit, unless it's somebody that has more of a muscle mass goal or trying to put on weight. But as I said, if they're trying to put on weight, nothing really needs to be tracked as thoroughly as if they're in a deficit. And then the two go hand in hand, and then they just have really bad mental health consequences. And it can be a shame, and it can be very, very detrimental and have massive long lasting impacts. The key thing for me is if someone's going on holiday and they're still taking their fitness tracker and they are still using MyFitnessPal, or, you know, they're a weekend away with the girls and they're not able to, you know, have a few drinks and enjoy themselves, or if they're really in those moments of what I call absolute joy and soulful moments and they can't do that, then I think that's one key, like you say, massive red flag. But then one question we actually did get asked as well, Andy, was how do you, I always think of like friends and like intervention, let's have an intervention, or like how do you actually, you know, approach that with somebody, because this is where the difficulty comes, doesn't it? Because these are technically healthy behaviors. So how do you have that conversation with somebody to say, hang on a minute, what's going on here? I mean, is that something you've ever had to do in your professional or personal capacity?
Yes, and yes. And it's changed over the years. I think, like, again, you get a bit older and I'd like to think that I can see it coming a little bit more now. So it is completely different working with a client versus potentially giving out some unsolicited advice to friends. Like it's almost easier. Well, I would say it's harder talking to friends sometimes.
Yeah.
Depending on the friend and depending on what they're doing and what stage they're at. I would say with clients, they're paying you for a professional service, and whereas one of the things I struggled with early on as a PT was trying to be a little bit too much of a people pleaser. So I'd tell people things they wanted to hear. Now I still do that because that's like my default setting. But if I go away and I think, actually, I need to say something here, then I'm a lot more likely to suggest to clients. It might be like I said earlier, do you know what? We're not going to wait for the next couple of weeks, or I don't want you to use FitnessPal for the next couple of weeks. Or if I look at, so quite often in an initial consultation, even if it's with nutrition, I'd like to get a look at what someone's training diary looks like a typical week. And if I look at that and there's, you know, no rest days, double session days, and those kind of things, I will ask, and I will kind of probe away a little bit. And I might not change anything initially because, you know, maybe they're getting away with it, but at some point I'm probably going to say, you need to do a little bit less here. And it's really difficult because it's a lot of the time it's coming from a good place. It's coming from a place of the client wanting to do better and wanting to get fitter and wanting to lose weight a bit quicker and get leaner or get stronger. So they want to do more. And if it's just a case of like almost like misplaced enthusiasm, that's quite easy because you can say, oh, look, do you know what? Take a couple of these sessions out, keep the food the same, and you're going to get, you're going to really, then big sessions, now you're going to perform better, and then they perform better because they're more rested. That's all the buy-in you need.
Yeah.
If it's dietary is way harder with nutrition when people, especially when, you get people that do go a little bit too far down the MyFitnessPal or the weighing themselves rabbit hole, or, you know, like X food is bad, I shouldn't eat this, I don't eat that, you know, and like all those things you said about eating out of restaurants, going on holiday and having to track it. I mean, they're all telltale signs. That's one where, again, in my experience, it's either a very slow, it's almost like putting the car in reverse and just slowly backing away.
You love a car analogy, don't you?
I do. I don't know why. It's just the thing that comes to mind. In my head, I'm hearing like the reversing.
Beep,
Yeah,
beep,
exactly. Just,
beep.
whoa, you've gone a little bit too far there. Yeah. And it's just a case of walking back those behaviors.
Yeah.
Maybe over a period of weeks, maybe even a period of months, depending on how far they've gone. If I think, and this is something that there is no blueprint on, but it's something that you get better at the more you work with people. If I think that person is, I don't want to say like a borderline anorexic, but you know what I mean by that, when they're, maybe they've, well, if they've had it before, it's a different conversation, but let's just say they've, over the weeks or months, they're cracking on and they've just slowly become more and more obsessed with it and they can't let it go. And no matter what I say, like they won't change. I will then advise, I'll either, you know, potentially I will kind of stop coaching them or stop. I'll be like, look, I can't be part of this if I think you're damaging your health. But more likely, I'll potentially recommend a therapist or someone, because if someone's like training to the point or eating to the point of like causing themselves mental anguish and physical harm, and they're not listening to a rational, like my rational words, maybe that's my lack of skills as a coach, or maybe it's just they need to hear a different voice, or they need to speak to someone with some deeper rooted issues going on. Yeah. But like I said at the start, it's a difficult conversation to have, that, no doubt about it. Have you had that yourself, mate, at all, like with clients or friends, where you've had to be the one to kind of step in or kind of intervene?
Yeah. I mean, I had an initial consultation with one of my clients, and I was just going, literally, talk me through what you're doing, talk me through how your eating habits are, talk me through your training schedule. And like, we had the consultation and we wrote it all down, and I was like, right, okay, we're going to flip the switch now. And I think I've spoke about this before in a podcast. I'm sorry if anyone remembers this from a previous podcast, but I said, and now you're going to be the coach and I'm going to be the client.
Oh yeah. I remember.
Yeah.
It's a good little drill though, right?
Yeah. And I said everything back to this client that she'd said to me. And I said, if you were the coach, what would you say to me? And she was like, oh God, I'm just doing way too much, aren't I? I'm like, exactly. I said, and the reason you're not making any progress and the reason you are feeling as you are and the reason you've kind of got yourself to this point is because all of these things have like added to your capacity bucket and it's just spilled over, mate. And like, yeah, it's a hard conversation to have. So I do think that is a very useful tool, if you can, to make somebody see another point of view. And it's that whole thing of if you always like you look in the mirror and you be the most critical of yourself, and like when you're trying to be a bit kinder to yourself, you're always thinking, oh, let's talk to yourself the way you talk to your best friend. And like I always think, okay, what would I do if my best friend was in front of me and telling me these things, and how would I respond then? And it's so I've had that conversation with a client. I was very fortunate though that I had known that person for a while as well. So, there's already a bit of trust there. I don't know, outside of a professional relationship, I think you always think about like close friends and family members. And again, there's so much potential there's so much emotion attached to those things, because usually being healthy, being somebody who trains, or being somebody that eats a certain way, they are usually key things that somebody uses to define themselves. So when you're trying to make somebody see that maybe that's not the most optimal, it can get very emotional, and they tend to get very defensive about those things. So it can be a really, really difficult thing to have. So I almost think it's easier to come from a professional place with it and just say, look, I'm the professional. in this. Like if you were my client, if I was your coach, this is how I would deal with you professionally. Or even I really think as a coach, it's really important, like you say as well, to just say, I'm not prepared to deal with you anymore, because it doesn't matter how much money you're paying for me. It's my duty of care to look after you. And if you're not prepared to look after yourself, then I can't look after you anymore. And like, I think then it's awful as a coach, I suppose, because you run the risk of them just going to somebody else who doesn't maybe have the same ethics or morals as you do. But obviously it's giving them the advice of, I really think you should go and speak to somebody, because there's a lot more going on. Sometimes all it needs is just a little bit of gentle education. Some people actually as well don't really realize how a lot of it's to do with sometimes stress, and sometimes people don't realize how stressed they are, and they may be using exercise and diet as a way of control, or just as a way of actually releasing a lot of what they think is stress, but it's actually adding more stress into them. So sometimes it's just a little bit of, hey, look, it's okay, just take a break. Like, you're in a acknowledge that you're in a really difficult time at the moment. So for example, current circumstances, the last few months have been really difficult for people. um so it's okay just to take a break and not stress about things so much. Let's not make this one area of your life something else that you need to stress about right now, because it's not benefiting you anymore.
That's being compassionate, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what that comes across as. And that's
Right, thank you.
brilliant. That's one of the that's one of the best outcomes, when you just you try and almost take the tension out of the potential tension out of the situation. You're like, look, it's fine, no big deal. You're going
Yeah.
to be all right. It's sort of like, don't beat yourself up. Like, I must say that every other day
Yeah.
to people, because again, it's just the population that I'm working with, the ones that want to please, want to do well, want to go harder, want to do this and that. And I'm like, look at where you've come from. You've done
Yeah.
amazing. Like, you're all right.
I always say to my clients as well, whether they're nutrition or whether they're PT, I want to be with you for a long time. I don't want to be with you just for a short time and a hard time. Like, whether it's training, I want to keep you training forever. Whether it's nutrition and you've got a certain goal, I still want to leave you knowing how you eat for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I'm not just going to get you to where you need to be and then sod off and never see you again, because then I've not done my job. So I always see my client coach relationships as more of a long-term thing. So you need to have that. It's so important that you have that compassion and that honesty and mutual respect. If they're, I suppose if they're paying us for a service, they have to respect our professional opinion. Well, they don't really. They can just fuck off and go somewhere else if they don't like what we're saying at the end of the day. But like, you'd assume that because they've come to us as a professional, that they respect our opinion. So yes, it's down to us as coaches to build that relatedness and that, have that compassion and empathy. But I'd hope that because of the relationships that I know both of us work to create with our clients, that when we said something like that, I'd hope that they would listen and know we have the best interests at heart.
You've just given me an idea,
Oh God.
or the seeds of an idea for like another podcast. Because I was thinking, like, when you're talking about being with the client for a longer period of time, some of the best, no surprises here, some of the best results that I've had with clients are the ones that you've worked with. I've worked with over a period of years, or at least months. But equally, like, sometimes you can just have like one or two sessions, or you like a consultation, and you kind of, you flick or you light the light bulb above their head, and they're like, oh wow. Like, we spoke a little bit about this before we started recording. Like, one of the guys I work with, just, it was really kind of basic education, and the light bulb went on, and we only worked together for like probably like a couple of sessions, but still in contact now and all good. The clients that I would say have the hardest time, or when I look back and think, could I have done better with certain clients, it's always the ones that are that kind of 6 to 8 week period, because you feel like you've given them a lot and maybe you haven't clicked, or it hasn't gone in, or whatever the reason was, it just didn't work. And you're like, if you'd have just given it a bit longer, then things might have been different. But anyway,
Sometimes,
slight tangent.
yeah, no. Like, it does resonate, and like, it just makes me think about. I mean, I've did a lot of work with this in my airline days and my management skills, but we do a lot of work about it at the moment with regards to nutrition coaching, and it still applies. It's the change curve. It's where they are on the change curve. Like and if anyone's ever done any kind of work with regards to motivational interviewing and readiness to change and things like that, like they might think that they're, you know, in the action stage and they're completely ready to change and they've signed up and they've, you know, booked in for however many sessions, and then they've just slipped back a little bit. And that could be, yes, you're very good, Andy, as well, that you're reflective in your own practice, as I know we both are. So you're like, oh, maybe I could have done something better. Maybe actually they just weren't in the right frame of mind. And it's the same when it comes down to things like over exercising and over dieting. Like, is somebody actually ready to receive the information or the message that you're telling them? Are they ready and in the right place to change their behaviors? Or are they just quite happy on their own path to self-destruction? And I know that sounds awful, but if they're not ready in their head to change, or they don't even see that there's a problem, with the best will in the world, and however you package up your message, it might be that it's just not received. You know, you've got to think that communication is also two-way. So you can package it up and deliver it in the best way possible. But if it's not, that person is not willing to receive it, then unfortunately it might just fall on deaf ears until they are ready to receive it, which is a shame.
And like you said, it's harder when it's going to become more emotional when you're talking to a family member or a really close friend. That unfortunately is just
Huge.
the fact that you care enough to bring it up.
Yeah.
You're invested already. There's always a level of investment, and you want the best for that person. What was I going to say? Yeah. So actually, talking about talking to friends, and how would you go about talking to a friend potentially if you think they needed help? Ideally they come to you first, but that's not always the case. But I would say some of my friends that I've had success with, it started off as a friend conversation, and it's, you know, like, because obviously people know what you do. Everyone loves talking about food and diet, and I'm doing this diet, or what's better, this potato or that potato? You know, you get all these kind of questions at especially weddings. That is a classic. But anyway, you get all those types of questions, and if someone shows, like, exhibits a genuine interest, or maybe I think, bloody hell, they're down the rabbit hole with they're almost a little bit too health conscious for their own good. If I can get them into a professional setting. So if I say, look, why don't we book in and we'll actually sit down and talk about this kind of professionally? Because actually, like, I don't know if you've had this, but I definitely have. Like, when your friends see you in a professional setting, it's weird for them to hear you talking. Because if I'm talking about in the pub, I'm going to be a lot looser and just, oh, come on, mate, sort yourself out. Whereas when you sit down with them or have them in a gym, I can't help but turn on kind of professional mode, even if it's a friend sat in front of me.
Yeah.
And they respond, they see that, and they're like, oh, wow, actually, it's not Andy fucking around. Like, he knows what he's talking about, hopefully. And just to kind of put a bow on it with what you said about sometimes people aren't ready to change. Also, sometimes, so this goes to the original question, which is, what if you see someone and you're worried about them? It might not be any of your business. There is that has to enter into the list of possibilities. So maybe for you that seems extreme, and this is definitely another podcast. Just because you think something is extreme, to them it might be the norm.
Yeah.
And if they're carrying that out, so it's not so much the behaviors, like we said, training, caring about your diet, maybe training twice a day, maybe using Fitness Pal or tracking your food. To some people, even just doing that seems insane. If they're carrying it off and they're absolutely fine, functioning, it doesn't bother them because they don't have that emotional attachment. So the people that can detach emotionally from food can do all that stuff, because to them it's just data. It's just like entering numbers into a spreadsheet. It doesn't bother me. I just track it. Some people can't get their heads around that. So there is an element of, not, maybe it's a little bit of jealousy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you're just envious.
a little
But
bit,
I know
yeah.
what you mean. Like some people are like that anyway. It's like we were saying on like the should you track your calories episode. Like for general weight loss, you don't need to even track your calories. Some people are just that type of person where they like to have that element of control. It has no it has no side effects mentally to them. That's just how they operate.
No, they're good as gold. They can.
Yeah, exactly. Please tell us the secret. But like that is how they operate. And that's cool. But it's difficult. It's a really difficult one, especially I would definitely say with friends and family, it's a really difficult one. And like you say, it might be none of your business.
Yeah, I think so. Oh God, how the hell are we going to sum up this absolute monster, Rambo?
It's been a good one. It's been emotive.
I would say, if we're looking at the training side of things, so the title of the podcast is "How do you know you're doing too much?" From a training point of view, if you're getting a recurring injury that is not due to poor form, and it's not because of a pre-existing injury, do you know what I mean? You might have like a weakness somewhere, like biomechanically, you might have an issue. So you might need to change exercise selection. But if you keep getting like repetitive strain injuries, there's a good chance you're under recovering between sessions. And I think an easy fix to that is to adjust your training volume. And if words like training volume and periodization, they don't register and you're not sure what we're talking about, literally, again, book a PT or book a trainer and show them your program and go through it. Just spend a little bit of time going through it, because you might be doing all the right things, just a little bit too much, or all the right things, but you need to tweak the order. And these are things that can be done, like as far as training goes, those things can be done instantly. They're easy wins, those ones. They really are easy wins that you can do straight away.
Another thing I would say with regards to the training, also, if you're not making any more progress, that's probably quite a key. Or you're even, like you say, injuries aside, if you're not making any more progress, or if you feel like you're actually going backwards a little bit, then definitely that's another key indicator that you're probably overtraining. And even before you probably look into your program, take it back to basics. Are you sleeping enough? How are your stress levels in your day-to-day life? Are you fueling yourself for the demands of your exercise and the demands of energy of your body? So, take it back to those three things. What's your sleep like? What's your stress like? And is your nutrition on point? Particularly if you're worried about overtraining, that would be my key things.
And we mention these in every single podcast, things like sleep and, having good base, the foundation blocks in nutrition, because they're absolutely huge and they underpin a lot of what you'll be trying to do. Yeah. And if you care enough to listen to a fitness podcast, they're probably things that you should be addressing. Yeah. Like those would be, kind of foundation things to get in place. Yeah. Anything else training wise? I think actually, that's a great point about the plateau, because it might be a case of you've just been hammering the same program forever, and it might just need a change in program, or maybe even just take a week, like a deload week, or even take a week off. Yeah. And then suddenly you kind of take one step back to take two forward. I mean, but even that freaks people out, like taking 1 or 2 weeks where you just back it off.
Sorry to interrupt, but that's completely made me think about what happened when we went into lockdown. So obviously gym is not an option anymore. We switched to home workouts very quickly. I was broken for the first week because I was only using my body weight. We were utilizing tempo. We were utilizing different levers in different planes of motion, isometric movements. And I hadn't done any of that for months. So I was training in a different way, using a different stimulus without weights, and I couldn't walk. I was like the T-Rex trying to make the bed. Literally, it was in bits, just because it was a different movements that my body wasn't used to. So definitely, as well, that keeps things interesting as well, just to switch things up every so often. So sorry to interrupt, but that's a really, really, really good point that you just made there.
No, because it's worth making that point as well, because I think that's it's probably an underutilized thing, like training. People get into routine, they find something they like, it works for them, then it works a little bit less, then a little bit less, and then it stops working. Now, look, if you're carrying it off, you're not getting injured, you enjoy doing your workout and it's helping you maintain a level of strength, there is no reason to change it up. But I would say, just from a balance perspective, and if you do want to get stronger across the board, then you probably is something you want to consider. But that again, it's a slight tangent, but it's another thing just to look at, because if you might just have the perfect program, but you're doing too much of it. And like I said, that might just be the easiest win is you're training 6 days a week, you start training 5. Simple as that. In terms of the diet and the food, how do you know you're doing too much? It's even hard trying to explain it in terms of doing too much. I would say thinking too much about it for food. Training's doing, diet's thinking. Like, how much time are you dedicating to it? Now, to me, like the weighing of the food on scales, that's a few minutes out of your day. That to me is no big deal. It's the lying in bed at night, thinking about food for hours on end, thinking about food in between meals, like prepping the next meal. A little bit of that, a little bit of planning, a little bit of thinking ahead, great. Thinking about it constantly, awful. If every day becomes like a stress and all you can think about is food, you need to take a step back, stick those reversing lights on, and start veering away.
Yeah, massively. I would completely agree. If you're getting to the point where, as well, social events really start to stress you out, you are obsessing about every morsel that goes into your mouth, your nutrient timings become quite obsessive as well. That's another key thing. Like, oh, it's been 3 hours, I've got to eat. Okay, well, it doesn't matter if you go 4, it's no drama. Like things like that. Definitely. I mean, I'd eat constantly throughout the day if I could, but that's just me. Like if you really do have those lists of like good versus bad foods, again, wanky air quotes, because that language is just atrocious. Like, if you have a list of things that you just will never eat or completely off limits for no reason other than you've just demonized them in your head. And there are other massive indicators as well, in terms of, are you losing weight? Do you look unhealthy? Are your clothes hanging off you? Or, if you're trying to, like, are people saying to you, oh, you look really skinny, or are people talking about you behind your back? Like, I know that sounds awful. I mean, you're probably not going to know that, but you know when people are talking about you in those kind of ways. So yeah, just those things to look up. Are people actually saying to you, look, I'm really worried about you?
And a lot of that comes from a really good place as well, even though some of it can be incredibly clumsy, and some of it is a case of people should mind their own business. But you have to at least consider, if it's your mum or your best friend or a friend that you've known for a long time, if they're the ones that are saying it to you, they deserve to be heard, even if you disagree with it. Or if it's a really good one, this, like, if your reflex is to become offended or to want to shout them down, they're probably onto something. Or because you probably care about it a little bit too much.
Agree. Or is your coach telling you that they won't work with you anymore? That's probably a key one as well.
And that's the beauty of like a coach or therapist or any impartial observer. That's why you're paying them the money, to have like a dispassionate view. That's a surefire recommendation. If we're turning you away, it's probably not a good thing.
If you're offering us money and we're saying no. But no, good pod, Andy.
Well done, mate. Pleasure as always.
Thank you very much for that question. It was Penny again, wasn't it? But that was a very meaty episode, that one. So we wanted to devote enough time to that one.
We took a little morsel of Penny's question and just made an entire podcast out of it, because it's like that one of like doing too much, especially when it's good, like well intentioned.
We both said before we started, didn't we? Like, as soon as this topic is even mentioned, everybody has somebody that springs to mind.
Yeah, definitely.
As soon as you say, oh, how do you deal with overtraining or overexercising or like, you know, real obsession about food and dieting? How much is too much? Everybody has somebody pop into their head. So it's really good thing to talk about because it's a really difficult one to navigate. And
Yeah, and it can be something as like you think we've talked for however long and we've kind of like pulled it to pieces. But if you wanna kind of take it even simpler than that, with training and with diet, do you feel better because of it or worse? Like
yeah,
with training, if you're constantly injured and you're constantly in pain, something is wrong.
yeah,
If you care about your diet but you cannot switch off and you're thinking about it 24/7, that's not making your life better.
yeah.
That's
These are
not
meant to be
that's not helping.
these are meant to be healthy
Yeah,
behaviors.
yeah.
Yeah, so let's try and keep them that way. Yeah, agree. Completely agree.
Nice one, mate. Right, I'm going to love you and leave you. It's been a pleasure as always.
Oh, as always. And
And
yeah, catch you next week, bud.
thank you for listening, everyone. And I'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Not Another Fitness podcast. If you liked what we do, please subscribe and share. Tell all your friends. And if you want to follow us over on our socials, you'll find me and my contact details over on Instagram at The Flying Food Coach. And you'll find Andy
Over at Facebook, at the Facebook group Eat, Move, Lift, Enjoy, or feel free to drop me an email on info@andrewjohnscraggs.com. Thanks again for listening. Until next time. That'll do.
yeah, that'll do. That's good.
That'll do. I'll put that on there as well. That'll do.